He stepped back, pointed his 9mm Beretta semi-automatic at Caitlin's head, and pulled the trigger.
Doesn't matter how times they apologize, that is not going to return the lives of our children.
The case began on August 6, 2016 in Long Beach, California, when Karina Mancera, 26, and her daughter, Jenabel Anaya, were walking home with the daughter's father. As they approached their apartment, a man opened fire, killing both mother and daughter. The father escaped unharmed, but the crime shocked the community. Police launched a major investigation, reviewing video footage and processing evidence for months. In November 2016, detectives matched forensic evidence from the crime scene to Brandon Ivan Colbert Jr., who was in custody on an unrelated case. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Prosecutors alleged that the attack was unprovoked and carried out without warning. After a lengthy trial, a jury found Colbert guilty in January 2018. During sentencing in February 2018, tension filled the courtroom. Colbert disrupted the hearing, refusing to sit and listen as family members delivered emotional impact statements.
No, I don't care about that.
Relatives described their heartbreak, calling him a monster and speaking about the innocence and joy taken from their lives.
You acted, you behaved, and you achieved your goal as a real urban terrorist.
Despite his outburst, the judge moved forward and sentenced Colbert to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole, plus additional decades for the attempted murder and weapon enhancements. The case began on April 13th in East Las Vegas, when 2 young cousins, 21-year-old Carlos Gael Garcia and 24-year-old Luis Santiago Esquivel Jr., were leaving a party near Pecos and Owens. A confrontation broke out in the parking lot, and the situation escalated quickly. When police arrived, they found the victims fatally wounded, and investigators recovered multiple shell casings. Surveillance video, including footage captured by a nearby Tesla, helped detectives identify those involved. Within days, officers arrested 24-year-old Julio Bautista Martinez, followed shortly by 26-year-old Henry Ramirez. Both were charged with 2 counts of murder and remained in jail as the case proceeded. Several months later, in November, the men changed their pleas to guilty. Prosecutors relied heavily on video evidence and witness statements to support the case against them.
I want to start off saying I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused for all of you guys. I didn't intend to go out that night to hurt anyone at all.
I just like to say I apologize also for my actions. I take full accountability for the night, and I want to say I apologize dearly to the family.
During their December sentencing hearing, Bautista Martinez and Ramirez apologized in court and expressed remorse, but family members of the victims said no apology could undo their loss.
Y por muchos perdones que pida, nos van a regresar la vida de nuestros hijos.
It doesn't matter how times they apologize, that is not going to return to us the lives of our children.
A judge sentenced both men to life in prison, but with eligibility for parole after 22 years. They received credit for time already served and are scheduled to be transferred to High Desert State Prison. For the families, the decision offered accountability, even if it could not restore the futures their sons once had. The case began in September 2024, when Indianapolis resident Chanty Dixon ordered a ride home after work. Investigators say her driver, Francisco Valadez, did not complete the trip as expected and instead took her to a secluded area where she lost her life. The next day, police found her body in nearby woods, and rideshare trip records quickly led detectives to Valadez. After his arrest, he later admitted responsibility for the killing. More than a year later, in December 2025, Valadez accepted a plea agreement, admitting to murder while other charges were dismissed. During the sentencing hearing, Dixon's family addressed him directly.
You chose to take the life of my daughter, and now I have to deal with that. Even though I have suffered a great loss because of you, I will move forward.
Her mother said she would continue moving forward despite the pain he caused, and a letter from Dixon's daughter was read aloud, saying that justice would not bring her mother back, but would give her peace knowing someone was held accountable.
What you did to my mom was cruel, and now I have to wake up and be reminded of what you did to my mom. I believe you should be in prison for the rest of your life, although that won't bring my mom back. At least I know that she will get justice.
A judge then imposed a 45-year prison sentence and ordered that Valadez is never allowed to contact the family. Dixon's loved ones left court saying the case's conclusion allows them to begin focusing on healing. The case began early one morning in Miami's Bayside neighborhood when residents called 911 about a suspicious elderly man walking around houses and checking doors. One homeowner confronted 77-year-old Ruel Maxwell after finding him trying to open his front door. Minutes later, a woman walking her dogs saw Maxwell attempting to enter a parked vehicle and alerted her husband, an off-duty Customs and Border Protection officer who happened to be nearby. When the officer approached Maxwell, authorities say the elderly man produced a weapon and discharged rounds toward a vehicle and in the officer's direction, striking a car and a garage door. No one was physically hurt, and the off-duty officer responded until uniformed police arrived and detained Maxwell. He was later charged with attempted second-degree murder, burglary, and unlawful firearm use, and taken to jail. Neighbors described what they witnessed.
I just heard bang, 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 and I went outside looking around. I thought there was raccoons getting in my trash.
This was blocked off. Just this side of the street, and there was many police units.
The guy shot at him, he shot back, and then, the uniformed police showed up right away, like within a couple minutes.
At Maxwell's scheduled court appearance the next day, his attorney explained that Maxwell suffers from dementia and Alzheimer's and lost his wife recently with no prior criminal history.
He has dementia, Judge. He lost his wife 2 years ago. His only crime is truly this: he owns guns. If Mr. Maxwell didn't own his guns prior to him having Alzheimer's, he would never be an issue.
The judge responded by ordering a medical evaluation and directing that any weapons be removed from Maxwell's possession. His hearing was rescheduled so the court could review his health status, and the evaluation results are expected to guide whether he remains jailed, receives treatment, or faces additional court conditions. It began on a school morning in mid-November along the 215 Beltway in Henderson, Nevada. Brandon Dominguez Chavarria was riding with his stepfather when traffic tensions escalated between their vehicle and another car driven by 22-year-old Tyler Matthew Johns. What started as lane-merging frustration quickly turned into an emotional road encounter. Moments later, a was fired into Brandon's vehicle. According to investigators, his stepfather reacted instinctively, stopping the cars and confronting the other driver. A nearby officer intervened and detained Johns, while first responders rushed Brandon for medical care. Tragically, he did not survive, and the community soon learned that an ordinary school commute had ended in heartbreak. Weeks later, Johns returned to court for a preliminary hearing where the first detailed testimony was heard. Eyewitnesses described hearing a loud sound, seeing the vehicles maneuver, and witnessing the immediate aftermath.
All of a sudden, I heard pop, and I looked at my wife and I said, "That was a gun." And then I heard a crash.
Right past the Gibson off-ramp, that's when the two lanes were starting to merge. I noticed the vehicle, the blue vehicle, kind of angled in a way that it looked like it was gonna eventually try to get into that farthest right lane.
The responding officer grew emotional, recounting what he found inside the SUV.
So the door was left open by the stepfather. As I approached the vehicle, I noticed there was somebody sitting in that rear left seat of this SUV. Can't call it color, it was dark color. Kind of not really emotional at all. To get. Yeah, kind of thinking about things too much. Stay professional. So my job is to be professional. Think about stuff when you're doing your job. But there's nothing.
Brandon's stepfather spoke publicly for the first time with the help of an interpreter, saying he turned and saw the other driver aiming at him.
I look at him, I turn around to look at him, and at that moment I see that he was already pointing a gun at me.
After several hours of testimony, the judge ruled that enough evidence existed to continue the case toward trial, with John scheduled for another court date in December as Brandon's family and the city continue seeking answers and justice. The tragedy began on November 13, 2022, in Mareno Valley, California, when Daniel Jacks Jr., a Riverside County correctional deputy, and his 19-year-old daughter, Hannah, were driving along Gilman Springs Road. Coming from the opposite direction was Scott Bales, who had been drinking. Investigators say he crossed into their lane and hit their car head-on, killing both father and daughter. Hannah was known as a talented dance teacher and parade performer.
She was everything. She lit up every room that she went into. She was the sweetest, kindest, special young lady.
Daniel Jacks Jr. was remembered as a devoted husband and respected deputy.
He was the best dad, the best husband. He did everything for me, for us.
The crash left Daniel's widow to raise their remaining son alone. She later described how difficult it was to rebuild family life without her husband's support and her daughter's presence.
Going to bed at night, I'm alone now, and my poor son doesn't have his father to help guide him through these young adult years.
She emphasized that what happened was preventable, noting Bales had 4 prior DUI convictions, making this his 5th time being arrested for intoxicated driving. Nearly 3 years later, Bales appeared in court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. At sentencing, he apologized, but Daniel's widow said his words felt hollow.
I don't believe he shows remorse. He did turn around at the end and say that he was sorry, but it doesn't mean anything. It was his 5th time. So it's not an accident. His 5th time being caught with a DUI.
The judge sentenced Bales to 30 years in state prison, where he will eventually be eligible for parole. For the Jacks family, the decision represents accountability and a step toward closure, even if nothing can undo their loss. The case began on July 19, 2024, when 25-year-old Alem Alaves Garcia was driving south on State Route 163 in San Diego. Investigators later determined he was intoxicated, traveling at more than 100 miles per hour, and failed to brake before colliding with a Toyota Prius. Inside that car were 4 young men from Turkey: Farouk Setin, 27, Mahsun Dursun, 23, Abdurrezzaq Hizmali, 27, and Baris Savas, 25, all of whom died as a result of the crash.
This case is so tragic and so sad.
In the months that followed, prosecutors built their case, noting that Garcia's blood alcohol level remained roughly twice the legal limit, even hours after impact. They also accused him of trying to discard alcohol containers rather than helping the injured.
Rather than render aid to any of those dying victims, this defendant decided to throw alcohol containers that were all over his car over the freeway.
Eventually, Garcia chose to accept responsibility. In June 2025, he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. The victims' families, watching remotely from overseas, struggled to process the loss from afar.
The family had a very devastating reaction, and add the confusion that this occurred in a different country. And you could see the frustration.
In 2025, Alves appeared in court for sentencing and directly apologized, not asking for a second chance, but for forgiveness from the families for the pain he caused.
This is an apology letter towards the judge. It's not me asking for a second chance or an opportunity. It's me asking for forgiveness from the families and the friends for the pain and the grief I brought to each and every one of them.
The shame that he feels is obvious. It radiates from him.
The judge noted that he seemed genuinely remorseful and acknowledged the shame he expressed. She then sentenced him to 12 years in state prison. Prosecutors said the punishment was fair and stressed that driving under the influence is never acceptable when safe alternatives exist. Alves has begun serving his sentence, with a restitution hearing set for November. In the early hours of November 20th, police were tracking a reported stolen SUV driven by 27-year-old Steven Ara Zapata. As officers moved through Alhambra streets, Zapata's vehicle and a patrol unit driven by Officer Alex Sanders crossed paths in an intersection and collided. Sanders, who had been filling in for another officer that morning, was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. One of Zapata's passengers also lost her life, and another passenger was injured. Zapata himself was taken to a hospital with visible facial injuries before being booked into custody. Within days, prosecutors charged him with multiple offenses, including 2 counts of murder and allegations tied to fleeing police and causing deaths during the pursuit. Officials emphasized the gravity of the case, noting that the crash claimed the lives of both a police officer and an innocent passenger. Weeks later, Zapata appeared in court for his arraignment, where cameras captured scars and bruising from the incident. He entered a not guilty plea, and a judge ordered him held on more than $4 million bail, ensuring he remained in custody. His next court date was set for February 23rd, 2026. In early October, Utah father Micah Smith took his 2 sons and a daughter on a long hike in Big Cottonwood Canyon. Weather conditions worsened and daylight faded, but investigators say he continued deeper into the trail instead of turning back. As temperatures dropped, the family became lost and spent the night in the canyon. When rescuers arrived the next morning, the boys and the girl needed medical care due to exposure, and all were taken to the hospital for treatment. Following the investigation, Smith was arrested and charged with serious child-related offenses, with prosecutors arguing the hike was reckless and unsafe. They also noted past concerns involving Smith, including earlier domestic incidents and restrictions placed on him by authorities, which added context to their request to keep him in custody. A protective order was issued preventing him from contacting his family. During his first court hearing, Smith asked to be released before trial, but the prosecutor opposed the request, calling him a risk.
By Judge Ruby Mills. So, sir, no in-person, no telephonic, no electronic, no written contact. You may not go where they live or go to school. You may not have anyone else contact them for you, so no passing messages to them through anyone else. And you may not possess a weapon or any kind of ammunition while this case is pending. Mr. Smith, do you understand those expectations that I've laid out for you?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
Okay, I will sign this order now. A copy will be served upon you at the jail. Mr. Smith, please make sure you talk to your lawyer about what this protective order means and how you can address it with your judge.
Okay, Your Honor. I was wondering if you might consider a pre-release.
Let's see, Mr. Ross, what is the state's position on a request for a pretrial supervised release?
That's a hard no, Your Honor. I haven't had an opportunity to bring the victim to weigh in on this, and I direct the court to the declaration of probable cause. There's a significant safety risk, and a no bail warrant is absolutely appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Smith, I did have a chance to read through the charging document before the hearing today. I read it when it was first filed, and then I reminded myself of its contents this morning. There is substantial evidence to support the charges in this case, Mr. Smith, and I do find by a clear and convincing standard that you would be a danger to the alleged victims if you were released today. Now, that's not a permanent decision, Mr. Smith. It's a temporary one, and it can be reviewed as soon as your next hearing in front of Judge Ruby Mills. But, sir, you will remain in custody until that detention hearing and until Judge Ruby Mills decides to release you. Your court date with her for that detention hearing will be December 8th at 9 a.m. So that's next Monday, Mr. Smith. That gives you a limited window of time in which to talk to your attorney. So my strong suggestion for you is that you reach out to them starting tomorrow afternoon. Get a hold of the lawyer who's been assigned to your case so they can go through the facts of the case with you and answer your questions.
Okay, Your Honor.
Mr. Smith, do you have any questions about anything we've talked about here today? But before you do that, I will caution you, do not tell me anything about the facts of the case, what did or did not happen on the day in question.
Yes, Your Honor. Is there anything that I can do to help show that I'm not a danger or threat?
Okay. Well, Mr. Smith, that's an excellent discussion for you to have with your lawyer. At this stage of the proceedings, there's not anything further for us to decide. I've made my decisions in the case today, but like I said, you will have the chance to review those decisions in front of Judge Ruby Mills, and your lawyer can help you do that. So keep in contact with them, make sure you follow their advice and give them all the information they need.
Okay.
Okay. Then in that case, Mr. Smith, you're good to step back. I wish you good luck.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome, sir.
The judge agreed, saying evidence suggested it would be dangerous to release him. Smith was ordered to remain in jail while the case moves forward, with another hearing scheduled so a different judge can review the situation. Early in 2024, tensions were already high between Dustin Duren and his former partner, Caitlin Nafziger. They had 2 daughters together, but their relationship had become strained. In January, Dustin left Minnesota and moved to Berlin, New Hampshire, taking their daughter, E, with him. Caitlin stayed behind with their younger daughter. Through February, the two communicated mostly through calls and texts, often disagreeing about parenting, money, and where the daughters would live. Despite the arguments, February 28th, Caitlin was driven to a restaurant in Ossipee, where Dustin and E met her. The 4 had a quiet lunch together before driving back to Dustin's apartment in Berlin. Caitlin and her daughters stayed the night there, which Dustin later said he believed was a short visit before she would return to Minnesota. On February 29th, that visit turned into a full day inside the small apartment. According to Dustin's later interview with the police, he repeatedly asked Caitlin when she planned to leave, but she didn't respond. He claimed she made comments that worried him, threats about calling the police or taking the girls back to Minnesota, though the prosecution argued these conversations only show rising frustration, not danger. As evening came, Dustin began gathering Caitlin's things, telling her he would drive her back to the coast himself. Caitlin sat on the couch with E in her lap, saying she wasn't leaving. Dustin told investigators he tried to pick up his daughter, but Caitlin didn't let go, which led to more arguing. The prosecution described this moment very differently, as a disagreement that escalated because Dustin became angry when Caitlin refused to leave and continued holding her daughter. What happened next took place in seconds. Dustin later admitted that he stepped away, went to his desk, and picked up his weapon. He loaded it, returned to Caitlin, lifted E from her lap, and Caitlin died instantly. Prosecutors argued that this was a deliberate act sparked by anger. The defense claimed Dustin believed the daughter was in danger. Immediately afterward, Dustin placed both girls in his car and drove south. He stopped in Concord, called his parents, and told them what had happened. Then, he switched off his phone, which prevented the police from tracking him. His father contacted Berlin police, who went to the apartment and discovered Caitlin's body. Just after midnight on March 1st, an Amber Alert was issued, warning the public that Dustin was driving with 2 daughters and might be armed. Hours later, a citizen in Keene spotted a car matching the alert. Police found Dustin in the parking lot of a restaurant, with both girls unharmed in the back seat. The weapon he had used was still in the driver's side door pocket. In the months leading to trial, prosecutors built their case around Dustin's own recorded interview, where he described loading the weapon and firing.
This is Caitlin Nafziger. You can see her here with her daughter, Ellen. In this photo, you can see her as she was in life, holding one of her children close. She's dead because the defendant, Dustin Duren, the father of her children, murdered her. As Caitlin sat on the couch, holding her 4-year-old daughter Ellen on her lap, very much like you see there, the defendant ripped Ellen from Caitlin's arms. He stepped back, pointed his 9mm Beretta semi-automatic at Caitlin's head, and pulled the trigger. The defendant was still holding Ellen in his arms when he murdered her mother. The sound of the shot hurt Ellen's ears. After the defendant killed Caitlin, he took Ellen and her 1-year-old sister, Valen. He packed their things, put them in his car, and began driving. He got all the way to Concord, where he called his parents, and he confessed. He told them that he had killed Caitlin. He said he was going dark, and he shut off his phone, making it impossible for the authorities to track his location. The defendant's father called the Berlin police the police went to the defendant's apartment and found Caitlin there, dead. A few hours later, in the early morning hours of March 1st, 2024, an Amber Alert went out, including descriptions of the defendant, the girls, and the defendant's car. It was that Amber Alert that led to the defendant's arrest, after a citizen told the Keene police that she saw the defendant's car heading in the direction of an Applebee's in Keene. The police found the defendant in his car in the parking lot of Applebee's. Elowen and Valen were in the back seat. The murder weapon, that 9mm Beretta semi-automatic, was in the driver's side door. After his arrest, the defendant gave an interview with the New Hampshire State Police. He told them his version of the story, his version of what happened between him and Caitlin. He told the police that he wanted Caitlin to leave his apartment, and when she wouldn't, he got angry. He tried to take Elowen from Caitlin, but she refused, and he got angry. So he went to his desk, grabbed his gun, and used it to kill the mother of his children. You can see the words "very deliberate" up there on the screen. Those are his words, the defendant's words. Those are the words that he used to describe his killing of Caitlin Nafziger when he spoke to the police. Ladies and gentlemen of this jury, this will not be a case that is difficult to understand. This will not be a whodunit. There will be no mystery. The evidence will prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Dustin Duren murdered Caitlin Nafziger. The evidence will also show you why he did it. This is a case about anger and control. According to the defendant, he and Caitlin had argued over the course of the day. He wanted her to leave and go back to Minnesota, where she was from. And when Caitlin refused to do what he wanted, when he couldn't control her actions, he got angry. So he took his gun, pointed it at Caitlin, and pulled the trigger. It was, as he said, a very deliberate act. During this trial, the state will provide you with evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Dustin Duren is guilty of the murder of Caitlin Nafziger, as well as the crimes of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon and endangerment of life. You will be given that evidence in the form of witness testimony, photographs, videos, and physical evidence. And right now, we're going to talk about some of that evidence. Caitlin Nafziger and Dustin Duren were both from Minnesota. Together, they had two daughters, Elowen and Valen. In February of 2024, Elowen was 4 years old and Valen was 1. Caitlin and the defendant did not have a good relationship. It was rocky. By January of 2024, things were not in a good place. That month, the defendant moved from Minnesota to New Hampshire. He brought Elowen with him. Caitlin and Valen remained in Minnesota. The defendant drove from Minnesota with Elowen, and on January 23rd, he moved into an apartment in Berlin. That apartment was at 1063 Main Street. You can see 1063 Main Street here. It's a multi-family home in Berlin. The defendant's apartment was on the ground floor. After the defendant and Elowen arrived in New Hampshire, the defendant and Caitlin argued over the phone and through text messages. They argued about the children and their future. On February 27th, Caitlin and Valen flew to Boston. They took a bus from the airport to New Hampshire, where they met family, and they spent the night with that family on the seacoast. The next day was the 28th. That day, Caitlin and Valen got a ride and were dropped off at a restaurant in Ossipee. There, they met the defendant and Elwyn. After having lunch, the defendant drove them all in his car back to Berlin. They spent the night at 1063 Main Street, that apartment that you saw. The defendant believed that after this visit, Caitlin was going to return home to Minnesota without either of the girls. That was what he wanted. The next day, February 29th, according to the defendant, he asked Caitlin repeatedly when her aunt was going to come pick her up. He asked her every 15 minutes because he wanted her to leave. He didn't want her there. Caitlin ignored him. After repeated questions from the defendant about when she was going to leave, Caitlin told him, "I'm not leaving, I'm staying." During the course of that day, according to the defendant, Caitlin threatened to call the police and have the children taken away from him. This continued throughout the day. That evening, after a day of asking Caitlin when she would leave, and a day of Caitlin not doing what he wanted her to do, the defendant got angry. He was so angry that he started packing up Caitlin's things so that he could drive her to the seacoast, do it himself. His plan was to load Caitlin, her things, and both girls into the car, drive Caitlin to her family and drop her off, and then return back to Berlin with both of the girls. The defendant put the younger daughter, Valen, in her car seat. Caitlin remained sitting on the couch, holding Elwyn in her arms. Similar to that photo. Caitlin did not want to leave. The defendant tried to grab Elwyn from Caitlin, but Caitlin would not let go. She continued to hold Elwyn. She didn't want to leave. This made the defendant even angrier. Angry that Caitlin refused to leave his apartment, and angry that she refused to let go of her daughter Elwyn, the defendant had had enough. In his mind, the line had been crossed. Those are his words. Those are the words he told the police, and he described to them why he killed Caitlin and what was going through his head. By refusing to allow him to take her child from her arms, Caitlin had crossed the line. This is a diagram of the defendant's apartment at 1063 Main Street. If you look at the living room, you can see that there is a couch, a coffee table in front of it, and then a desk on the other side of the room. Those black bars that you see represent doorways in the apartment. And you can see the back door is down a hallway on the left side. Caitlin was sitting on the couch in front of the coffee table with Elwyn on her lap. According to the defendant, after he tried and failed to take Elwyn from Caitlin as she sat on the couch, he crossed the room and went to his desk. From his desk, he grabbed this, his Beretta 9mm semi-automatic. That had a loaded magazine in it, but no bullet in the chamber. According to the defendant, after he grabbed the gun, he racked it on the slide back, putting a bullet in the chamber. The gun was now ready to fire. The defendant walked back across the room from his desk, around the coffee table, and stood in front of Caitlin to her left. He grabbed Elwyn and ripped her from her mother's arms with his left arm. He was holding that in his right. After grabbing Elwyn, holding her in his left arm, he stepped back. and pointed his gun at Caitlin's head. At this point, Caitlin was sitting on the couch alone. She was unarmed. The defendant stood between Caitlin and the exit. Elwin in one arm, in the other. At that time, Caitlin did not have a car, she did not have a bus ticket, and her family was hours away. As Caitlin sat on that couch, holding Elwin in his arm, after stepping back, the defendant pulled the trigger. He did not miss. He fired one bullet. That entered Caitlin's skull from the left side of her head. It traveled through her brain and exited the right side. The gunshot was loud. According to the defendant, Elwin immediately started grabbing her ear and complaining of the noise. The defendant went to the garage and put her in the car. This is what the defendant told the detectives later about what he was thinking at that moment after hitting Caitlin in the head. He told them that he knew, in his words, that he was screwed. He understood what had happened, and he understood the consequences. He went back in the house. He got Valen, who was still in her car seat. He grabbed clothes for himself and for the girls. He grabbed food and water. He grabbed pillows and blankets. He put all of these things into his car. He grabbed his desktop computer. You can see it there in the defendant's trunk. After packing up those supplies with both girls in the car, the defendant started to drive. The defendant left his apartment in Berlin sometime between 5:38 p.m. and 6 p.m. on February 29th. He drove to Concord, arriving a little bit before 9 p.m. In Concord, the defendant sent a video of the girls to his mother, and then he called his parents. At 10:08 p.m. in Concord, he called them and told them what he had done. He said, "I killed Caitlin." He said, "You should probably call the police." He also said, "I'm going to go dark, and I'm turning off my phone." He said he would turn himself in, but he wanted some time with the girls before he did it. At about 10:22 p.m., the defendant did turn off his phone. According to him, he drove west into New York State. At some point, he stopped, and he and the girls slept in the car in the back seat. According to the defendant, when he woke up the next morning, he decided to turn himself in. So he started driving back to New Hampshire. As the defendant drove through Keene the morning of March 1st, he decided to have breakfast somewhere with his girls. While driving, he was seen and he was placed under arrest. The murder weapon, that 9mm Beretta semi-automatic, was in the door, still loaded. That was March 1st. The evidence in this case will prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant is guilty of knowing second-degree murder and the alternative charge of reckless second-degree murder for Caitlin Nafziger. It will also prove that he committed the crimes of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon and endangerment of a child. The evidence will prove to you that the defendant was not provoked when he pulled that trigger, and that the killing of Caitlin Nafziger was not justified. When asked by a detective if Caitlin had threatened to harm anyone, he said no. When asked by a detective if he knew he was endangering Elowen by so close to her, he said, yes. The evidence will prove to you that the defendant caused Caitlin's death merely because he was angry and nothing more. You will hear testimony during this trial from state troopers and police officers who will describe how they investigated this case and how they gathered important pieces of evidence. You will hear from the medical examiner who conducted an autopsy of Caitlin's body. An intelligence analyst with the New Hampshire State Police will describe for you how she used cell phone location data to map the defendant's movements before he turned his phone off. You will hear testimony from an expert firearms examiner who will tell you that the gun that fired the bullet that killed Caitlin was the defendant's. And you will hear what the defendant told the police when they interviewed him and when he confessed. His version of the story. After his arrest, the defendant spoke with the state police at length. That interview was audio and video recorded. You will be able to see it for yourselves. You will be able to see the defendant's body language, his demeanor, and his tone of voice. You will see that the defendant was calm and in control when he described Caitlin Nafziger. I've already shown you a few of the things that he said during that interview. You will see those and more presented during this trial. Those statements are just some of the evidence that will prove that the defendant is guilty. Caitlin is dead. She is dead because the defendant became angry when she refused to leave his apartment. And she is dead because she would not stop holding her 4-year-old daughter. And that made the defendant mad. So he grabbed his gun, took Caitlin's daughter away from her, and shot her in the head.
Prosecutors said the shooting was not about protection, but control. That Dustin became enraged when Caitlin refused to leave and refused to hand over their daughter. The defense argued that Dustin, a Marine veteran with PTSD, acted in fear, believing his daughter was being taken from him.
This case is about broken promises, secret plans, and a father's unyielding love. It's about a Marine reacting to a threat toward his beloved daughter. A horrific tragedy, but not a criminal offense. Dustin Duren is not guilty. Dustin, a Marine veteran, responded to a threat when he shot Caitlin one time. He saw his daughter being held hostage in front of him. He believed his daughter was in danger of being hurt, in danger of being a pawn in a custody dispute, in danger of being taken away from him, in danger of being kidnapped. The law allows for deadly force to be used against another in certain circumstances. The law says Dustin's actions were justified. He's not guilty of murder, he is not guilty of reckless conduct, he is not guilty of endangering the welfare of the child. You will hear that Caitlin agreed with a plan to let Dustin take their daughter Elowen to Berlin, New Hampshire from Minnesota, and that she would follow later with their younger daughter Valen. You will hear that she later changed her mind, but did not tell Dustin. Instead, she flew to Boston with their 1-year-old Valen, and then planned with her aunt to take Elowen and Valen from their father in the middle of the night while he was sleeping. To carry out the secret plan, Caitlin and Valen went to Berlin, stayed the night at Dustin's, and then ignored Dustin's requests for her to leave. Dustin decided he would need to bring Caitlin back to the seacoast where her aunt lived. And when he tried to get the kids ready to leave, Caitlin told Dustin no, She was not leaving. She demanded Dustin pay her more money. She threatened Dustin she was going to call the police and lie to them, accusing him of kidnapping Elowen. She told Dustin she was taking the kids back to Minnesota and he would never see them again. While making these threats, Caitlin remained seated on the couch, holding on to Elowen. She would not let go of Elowen when Dustin tried to free her. She gripped Elowen. She tugged Elowen. She bear hugged Elowen. Elowen was being held hostage right in front of Dustin. Dustin did not want to hurt Elowen. She was crying. He was worried she was being hurt. On the third attempt to free Elowen from Caitlin's grip, Elowen let out a shriek. This was a startling and terrifying reaction that caused something in Dustin to tick. In his fear for Elowen and his need to protect her, he walked a couple feet over to his desk, got his gun, chambered around, pulled Elowen to safety, and fired one round into Caitlin's head. Dustin Duren defended his daughter. He is not guilty. You will hear that evidence through the state's case and through the defense's case. But now I want to talk to you about Dustin. Dustin is a father and he is a Marine. These two things shape his identity and his decision making. Dustin enlisted with the Marines when he was 18 years old. He received extensive training in firearms. He was drilled with firearms, expected to be able to assemble, load, aim, and shoot a firearm quickly, automatically, without conscious thought. Use of a firearm became automatic and instinctual to him, something that he could do quickly, accurately, and without forethought. He was trained to use a firearm to respond to threats. You will hear that Dustin was the most proficient shooter in boot camp and the squadron high shooter during annual marksmanship training. He became a certified marksmanship coach and taught hundreds of Marines how to perfect the weapon. You will also hear that Dustin had been diagnosed with service-connected PTSD and has suffered bouts of depression in the past. Before meeting Caitlin in 2019, Dustin felt like his life was meaningless. He had no real purpose, no real reason to live. But shortly after beginning a relationship with Caitlin, she became pregnant with their first child. Dustin's mental health began to improve. He was beginning to believe he had a purpose, having a family. He and Caitlin lived together at his parents' home. Soon after Elowen was born, they moved to Las Vegas and lived there together. Dustin was Elowen's primary caretaker. He and Elowen were bonded. At her very first Christmas, Caitlin flew home to Minnesota, leaving Dustin and their 1-year-old Elowen behind. You will hear that Dustin's memory of that Christmas burns bright to this day. Dustin was feeling awful about the meager Christmas he could only provide for his daughter, but her pure joy that day shifted his whole mindset. He saw her big smile and her joy, and it was a pivotal moment in his life. He thought, this is my purpose, this is my life, Elowen. From that moment, it was like a whole world had changed. Dustin's view on everything had changed. His entire life turned to Elowen. The two were bonded. Eventually, Caitlin became pregnant with their second child, Valen. She was born in Las Vegas in January of 2023. By July of 2023, Dustin and Caitlin separated, and all four returned to Minnesota. Dustin moved back in with his parents. Caitlin moved in with a friend. For several months, they tried co-parenting. After a few months of this arrangement, Dustin and Caitlin came to a compromise in which they would both move to New Hampshire but live separately. They decided that Dustin would travel by car to New Hampshire first, taking Elowen with him, and then Caitlin would fly out later with 1-year-old Valen and leave her with Dustin. Caitlin would then return to Minnesota for a few months to work and save some money, and then move to New Hampshire permanently in the early summer when she would have seasonal employment with her Aunt Brenda in Hampton. Dustin prepared for the trip to New Hampshire. He found an apartment in Berlin and showed Caitlin photos of the apartment. Caitlin gave Dustin a bunch of Elwyn and Vaylin's stuff to take with him. The day Dustin left, he picked Elwyn up from where Caitlin lived, at her friend's house, and Caitlin willingly handed over Elwyn. Caitlin did not call the police. She did not report a kidnapping. She agreed to this plan. On their trip east, Dustin called and texted Caitlin several times with updates. He sent pictures of Elwyn. After Dustin got to New Hampshire, he and Caitlin had several arguments over the phone about money. Caitlin wanted to claim both girls on their taxes and wanted Dustin to send her money. Caitlin threatened to call the police and falsely claim that Dustin had kidnapped Elwyn and had taken her to New Hampshire without Caitlin's permission. Dustin was worried that Caitlin wouldn't bring Vaylin and that the girls would be separated. You will hear that when Caitlin made this threat a few weeks before this incident, Dustin was alarmed. He called Caitlin's mother. He called Caitlin's father. He called the Berlin Police Department. He offered to let Caitlin claim both girls on their taxes, paid for her plane ticket to New Hampshire, and sent her some money. 2 weeks later, Caitlin and Vaylin did fly to Boston, as planned, on the 27th of February. Dustin knew when they would arrive in Boston, but no other details, because Caitlin did not share those. He did not know how Caitlin and Vaylin were getting to Berlin or when. He did not know if Caitlin planned on staying in Berlin or where she would stay. He assumed she wanted to stay a couple days in Berlin to visit with Elwyn and offered for her to stay with him and the girls, but Caitlin declined this invitation. Caitlin had other plans, secret plans she did not share with Dustin. You will hear about the plan that Caitlin created with her Aunt Brenda. Brenda will tell you that she lives in Hampton. She spoke to Caitlin about her visit to New Hampshire. She will tell you that Caitlin and Vaylin flew into Boston and shuttled to Seabrook, where Brenda and her friend picked them up. Brenda will tell you that Caitlin and Vaylin spent the night in Hampton, and while there, Brenda and Caitlin came up with a plan to take the kids from Dustin.
Objection. Reproach. Yep.
While Caitlin was visiting with her Aunt Brenda the night before she met Dustin, Brenda and Caitlin came up with a plan to take the kids from Dustin. Brenda will tell you that she agreed to bring Caitlin and Vaylin to meet up with Dustin and Elwyn, drop them off, and wait a day or two for Caitlin to call her for a ride back with both of the girls. Caitlin would sneak the two kids out while Dustin was sleeping, and Brenda would pick them up and take Caitlin and her kids to the airport to fly back to Minnesota. Caitlin already had a return ticket to Minnesota, and Brenda was going to buy a ticket for Elwyn. And Vaylin was young enough that she could sit on her mom's lap. You will hear that when Caitlin texted Dustin that Brenda was driving her up, Dustin suggested they meet up at a spot halfway between Hampton and Berlin. And he found a restaurant in Ossipee. Dustin believed that Caitlin and Brenda would have a meal with him and the girls, and then Caitlin and Brenda would return to Hampton, while Dustin and the girls would head north to Berlin. The next day, Dustin and Elwyn drove to Ossipee and got to the restaurant first, where they waited inside the restaurant, waiting for Caitlin and Vaylin. When Caitlin arrived, she called Dustin, asking him to come outside and help with Vaylin's things. Dustin and Elwyn went outside to meet Caitlin and Vaylin. Brenda was already gone. They put Vaylin's stuff in the car, and the four of them, Elwyn, Vaylin, Dustin, and Caitlin, went into the restaurant to eat. Dustin and Caitlin did not have any real conversation. Dustin visited with Valen, Caitlin with Elowen. Caitlin started asking Elowen if she could come see Elowen's new house. Dustin was confused, since Caitlin had said she did not want to stay with them. Caitlin did not speak directly with Dustin, instead saying things to Elowen for Dustin to overhear. Dustin agreed that Caitlin could spend a night, and so after dinner, all four of them got into Dustin's car, drove back to Berlin. Caitlin sat in the back seat with the girls. That night, Dustin slept in his bed with Valen, and Caitlin and Elowen slept on an air mattress between the bedroom and the living room. The next day, they all went to the Berlin Library for children's story time and arts and crafts. They came home and had lunch. Caitlin spent the afternoon playing with the girls and not speaking to Dustin. Dustin tried to ask Caitlin what her plan was when she was leaving, but Caitlin would not answer him. Dustin continued to ask, and Caitlin continued to ignore her all afternoon. Caitlin played with Elowen and Valen in Elowen's bedroom, and every so often, Dustin would go to the doorway of the room and ask Caitlin when and how she was leaving. Caitlin did not respond. At one point, she picked up her phone and started using it. Dustin didn't know if Caitlin was messaging someone. Her silence was telling. Dustin was suspicious. Caitlin's behavior concerned him. Something was off. Eventually, once it started to get dark, Dustin told Caitlin that since she wasn't responding, he was going to drive her all the way back to Hampton. And he told Caitlin it was time to leave. Dustin was stressed because it was a long drive, and by the time he dropped Caitlin off in Hampton and then drove all the way back to Berlin with the girls would have been up all night. Caitlin sat down on the couch. Dustin put Valen in a car seat and sat on the hallway floor. He went back into the living room and saw Caitlin go over and pick up Elowen, return to the couch, and set Elowen on her lap. Elowen straddled Caitlin's knee. Dustin told Caitlin, "Come on, we're leaving," and tried to take Elowen to get her ready to go. Caitlin tugged Elowen tightly and pulled her back, wrapping her arms around Dustin's daughter in a bear hug. Dustin let go and asked Caitlin to let go of Elowen, and Caitlin said no. Dustin kept asking Caitlin to let go of Elowen and get ready to leave. Caitlin started demanding Dustin pay child support, give her $2,000 per month. Caitlin told Dustin she was going to take Elowen and Valen back to Minnesota and Dustin would never see them again. Caitlin again threatened Dustin that she would call the cops and tell them Dustin had taken Elowen without permission. Caitlin was still holding on to Elowen, her arms wrapped tightly around Elowen, restraining her. Caitlin told Dustin again that he would never see his kids. Dustin felt like Caitlin was holding Elowen hostage. He was seeing his daughter held hostage in front of his eyes. He kept begging Caitlin to let go of Elowen and to just get ready to leave. Caitlin refused and kept saying she was taking the kids and he would never see them again. At this point, Valen was crying. Elowen was upset and crying. The situation was overwhelming. Dustin tried again to free Elowen, but Caitlin yanked her away again. Dustin didn't want to force anything, so he just let Elowen go. He tried again to persuade Caitlin to let go of Elowen, and she refused. She continued to threaten Dustin. Dustin didn't know who Caitlin had been messaging on her phone, whether there was someone outside waiting. He was suspicious. He was concerned. He was fearful. Dustin could see his gun on the desk in the living room in close proximity to Caitlin. Dustin knew that Caitlin knew how to use the gun. He himself taught her how to handle and shoot a gun. He couldn't take his eyes off Caitlin and Elowen while Caitlin was holding Elowen hostage right next to a firearm. Dustin tried one more time to take Elowen. He tried to hold one of Caitlin's wrists while wrapping his arm behind Elowen so that he could free Elowen from Caitlin's bear hug. Caitlin did not let go and instead got more aggressive. She braced her foot against the living room table and pulled back hard. Elowen screamed, a piercing cry like she was in pain. Immediately, everything felt extremely dire to Dustin, like Elowen was in immediate danger. Hearing Elowen scream was like a tick. The only thing he was thinking was that he had to save Elowen. In an autonomous motion, like he had been trained by the military, he grabbed his gun. He had no thoughts in his head other than he needed to save Elowen. He acted instinctually, automatically, and reflexively. In less than 3 seconds, he grabbed the gun, pulled Elowen out of the way, and eliminated the threat, shooting Caitlin in the head. Elowen was safe in Dustin's arms. He is a Marine. He acts like a Marine. He did what a Marine is trained to do. Dustin saved Elowen. Dustin took the girls and left the apartment in his Subaru. He needed to make sure the girls were okay and to get out of that apartment. He didn't want Elowen to see anything. After driving south for about 2 hours, he stopped for gas in Concord. He called his mom and told her he shot Caitlin. He asked for his dad to call the police. He also sent them a video of the girls in the car at that moment to show them the girls were safe. He said he was going to spend a few more hours with the girls before he turned himself in. And that's what he did. He spent a few more hours driving with, talking with the girls, making sure they were okay, making sure they knew he loved them, before turning around and driving back to New Hampshire. He planned to get breakfast with the girls before he turned himself in, but the police located him before he was able to do so. And you will see Dustin's arrest on video. You will see how he complied with the police commands, how he warned the police there were kids in the car, how he warned them there was a gun in the driver's side door, and he then gave a lengthy interview to the police. The state will probably show you Dustin's interview and what he told them after his arrest. This is a case about broken promises, secret plans, and a father's unyielding love. It's about a Marine reacting to a threat toward his beloved daughter, a horrific tragedy, but not a criminal offense. Dustin is not guilty. At the end of the evidence, the judge will instruct you on the law, and he may explain to you that what the law allows when defending others. He may instruct you that a person is justified in using deadly force against another when he reasonably believes that such person is committing or about to commit a kidnapping, is likely to use any unlawful force against a person present while committing or attempting to commit a burglary, or is likely to use any unlawful force in the commission of a felony against the actor within his own dwelling or home. When he shot Caitlin, Dustin reasonably believed that Caitlin was about to kidnap Elowen and that Caitlin was using unlawful force to commit a crime. She was holding Elowen hostage in front of him, threatening that she would take his kids to Minnesota and he would never see them again. Caitlin would rather hurt Elowen than let her go. And when Caitlin hurt Elowen, Dustin acted to save her. Dustin's entire life purpose was to be a good father for Elowen and Balin, and he did what he believed was necessary to protect Elowen. The judge may instruct you. You cannot convict Dustin unless the state proves to you not only that Dustin killed Caitlin, but that he did so without justification. You must find Dustin not guilty unless you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Dustin did not act to defend his daughter and prevent a kidnapping. The state will not meet its burden. Dustin was justified under the law. He acted to protect his daughter. After hearing all the evidence, we are confident you will find him not guilty.
After hearing days of testimony, witness accounts, police interviews, and digital evidence tracing Dustin's movements, the jury deliberated for a few hours. On October 28, 2025, they returned a guilty verdict on all charges: second-degree murder, reckless conduct with a deadly weapon, and child Following the verdict, the judge ordered a pre-sentence investigation, a standard process before determining punishment. A sentencing hearing was initially scheduled for December 11th, 2025, but the court later noted that sentencing had not yet occurred and remains pending as the paperwork and evaluations move forward. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.